of the process.
Is this a failure of technology or a failure of will or a failure of money or a mixture?
I think it's...
No, Sir Bill, it's failure due to you and Brexiteers' stupidity like you that has caused this mess. But anyway, hello there, and I do hope you're all well, and here we're witnessing absolute madcap Brexiteers in the European Scrutiny Committee being schooled on the ESS, the EU Entry-Exit System. Now, I could go on about it, but I'll leave a link in the description box, and you probably won't read it because you all know about it anyway on this channel. And it doesn't matter what John Keefe, Chief Corporate and Public Affairs Officer for Getlink, Eurotunnel, Doug Bannister, Chief Executive Officer for the Port of Dover, and Renaud Thillaye, sorry for butchering the name, I do apologise, he's the Head of Public Affairs for Eurostar, say the more madcap they just became.
So your operations will be particularly impacted by the EU's entry-exit system as you facilitate UK-France juxtaposed border controls. Could you outline briefly what EES, as it's called, actually is, when it is expected to begin, and why it will be felt so acutely at your sites versus, for example, Heathrow Airport?
EES is the European Entry and Exit System. It will be applied to all third country citizens seeking to enter the Schengen area. It requires the capture of biometric data, facial recognition, facial scans and fingerprints, alongside a series of biographical data to properly identify each person coming into the EU. The critical element is that the data enrolment into the system happens on the first entry into the zone once the scheme comes into effect. Now, the scheme has been due to come into effect for several years. It's been pushed back on a number of occasions because the systems haven't been ready to cope with the amount of data that will be needed from all the rest of the world countries. And also the process by which that data will be captured, using tablets, using kiosks, using smartphones, using face-to-face interaction with border officers, is not yet fully determined. So, as operators of the Channel Tunnel, with juxtaposed border controls, which means that you pass through both the exit from the UK and the entry into the EU on our terminal in Folkestone. The capture of the data required for enrolment happens in the UK. And that means that the time required to capture all of this data on top of the passport control at the border could add anything between a multiple of 2 to 4 times the time required to go through the border today. And that unresolved could result in significant queuing for passengers in cars in particular trying to get through the enrolment process. The difference with somewhere like Heathrow is twofold. First of all, Heathrow doesn't have juxtaposed border controls, so the enrolment would not happen in Heathrow, it would happen in the destination airport on continental soil. And the second one is Heathrow deals with individual airline passengers one at a time, whereas as operators of the Channel Tunnel, all of our shuttle passengers travel in cars, in groups. And those groups can be anything from 1 or 2 people in the front seats of a car to 4 or 5 with children or grandparents in the back to 60 at a time on a coach. And each one of those people would be required to enrol their data on UK soil before entering the EU. And that's where the risk lies.
And what is the reason why this is happening at the moment in a manner which you regard as, and quite rightly so, as unsatisfactory, and how could it speed it up?
The principle behind the ES system, I don't think any of us would argue with, it's to enhance border security. The process by which that's being developed has been slightly piecemeal because the the principle was established, and then the processes and the systems have been developed subsequently. And those systems developments by the EU agencies that are responsible is taking longer than expected. And there are new elements being added into it which are welcome, like the capture of data using a mobile application in advance at home or en route, but which are not yet fully developed. So the scheme is put back once again. We understand until after the Olympic Games in Paris in 2024, but we still don't have the full date, the confirmed date, nor the absolute final specification of the process.
Is this a failure of technology or a failure of will or a failure of money or a mixture?
I think I don't think it's a failure at this stage. As the scheme has evolved, so new technology has developed alongside it, and the new technology is being promoted as part of it. So it's not a cut and dried scheme, introduce it as is. So as with many large-scale technological developments, it's iterative. But we need to know what the final goal is in terms of the data required, the form that it has to be captured in. And we need to know what the technological solutions that will be permissible will be. And those are the elements that we haven't yet got.
Who do you point to as the logjam on this?
Well, this is an EU scheme, but it's applied to all countries, rest of the world, including now the UK. And so it's a discussion between governments as to how it should be applied. As operators, we need a spec. Once we have a spec, we can put the technology in place, put the infrastructure in place, manage the traffic flows that go with. The absence of the definitive spec is what's lacking at present.
Well, I know David Jones wants to ask a question as well.
Yes, and I'd be interested to hear from all three witnesses. What I'm finding difficulty in understanding is why the enrolment has to be done at the border. Why, for example, could there not be an office or offices set up around the country where people could actually go to enrol? It could be supervised by a Frontex official, and it would mean that you wouldn't have the congestion at the border. Am I missing something, or is there?
So I'll take the first go at that, if I may, David. Really, it comes down to how the regulation is currently written within European law, which is that, as it's currently written, the initial enrollment process needs to take place at the border in front of an immigration officer, in our case, Police aux Frontières. One of the things that we've been pushing very hard for is so-called remote registration. Yes. And that would then enable things to be done even at home, or certainly in advance of the traffic reaching the port or the tunnel. That's the important thing.
Just interrupt you there. That wouldn't actually deal with all the process of enrolment, though, would it? It would only...
If we... The app as it's designed right now will be able to capture the passport details as well as the facial image, but it doesn't do so well on the fingerprints. Right. So there's one piece of information that's missing. But having said that, if it captures most of it, then that's going to alleviate a lot of problem. Then the next thing is to be able to still have the possibility of taking the rest of the biometric information alongside of that at a site remote, certainly for the Port of Dover, remote from the port. It might be able to be nearby, but as the regulation is written right now, it has to be done at the port.
So it's bureaucracy, really. If they were to change the regulation and allow for enrolment at some remote location, that would, if not totally solve the problem, certainly it would significantly mitigate it, wouldn't it?
I suppose there's two components to that. One is the regulation needs to change, so you're right, and the second thing is the staffing of that process would need to be worked out.
Yes, but I mean, the governments could come to arrangements as to...
You would think so.
And, yeah.
I share the analysis and the understanding of my colleagues of how the system works, and I can confirm that in the regulation it's explicitly written that any data has to be captured under the supervision of a border officer. And if it's captured ahead of the borderline, it needs to be verified on the borderline by a border officer. And that's what makes it very difficult.
So, again, if the remote enrolment was supervised by an officer, that would have solved the problem.
To some extent, because the regulation specifies that any data captured remotely needs to be verified when the person crosses the border.
That's why the regulation needs to be changed or amended.
There is also an element, if I may, where for border security, the ideal thing would be that you could witness the face matched with the passport, matched with the fingerprints. Now that also can be done remotely through the use of video cameras and particular holes and that sort of stuff, so that the fidelity of that information capture is maintained. So in other words, there would be solutions once the regulation gets unlocked.
Well, this is very interesting because, frankly, it sounds to me as if it's a few words to be changed in a regulation and other mechanisms introduced. So what international comparisons could you give to demonstrate the question of whether or not, for example, between Canada and the United States or any other country which has borders in another country? I mean, this, with modern technology, the way it is at the moment and the speed of change, you'd have thought that somebody would have come up with an answer along the lines that Mr. Jones has been suggesting. And you seem to confirm that it can be done. So the question is, again, why isn't it being done? And if I may say, who would you point to if you wanted to try and make an international comparison of something that's being done properly somewhere else in the world?
Well, if I may, John, probably one of the best borders to take a look at for high volume activity in a constrained space that happens very well is between USA and Mexico.
Oh, in Mexico.
Yeah,
right.
and I think it's down near Laredo, from memory. And so they've got their whole process set up. The thing that strikes me is today is a very manual process. You need to hand your passport over. They need to, an officer needs to look through it. They might ask a question. Have you been in, 90 out of the last 180 days? What's the purpose of your trip and all that sort of stuff? We're talking about going to a digital process, and that should make it easier. It should make it faster. It should make it simpler. But what we need to do is unlock the ability to respond to that electronic process by making certain that the regulation allows for that innovation to take place.
I think there's another part of it which is unique to this route through the short straits, and I include Renaud and Eurostar in this because we all move people across the short straits, either through the tunnel or by ferry across the channel. The juxtaposed border, and in the case of the port and the channel tunnel, the vehicle-based approach to travel are unique. No other country has that juxtaposed border with the EU. This scheme was designed for airports, quite simply, without any consideration for the nature of transport that happens across the channel. And so for a one ticket, one seat, one person approach in a large indoor environment where there is space to put both kiosks for the data capture and also additional space for border officials, it's easy. Where it struggles is when cars drive through large open spaces, car parks, in all weathers, in all lights, in all times of the day and night. And the data capture has to look at individuals who are deep inside a vehicle. And that then becomes very complicated. So the scheme is not designed for the purpose it's being addressed to. It's designed for airports, designed for comfortable airports in EU territory. And it's by the nature of the border that we have with the EU, it's being addressed to a vehicle system and a juxtaposed control, which happens in the UK. So that's what makes it so different. And even looking at the border Doug's referring to in San Isidro, those volumes are similar to what we move. But we don't have the people getting out of vehicles. We don't have the juxtaposed to manage.
Now, Marcus Fish would like to ask a question.
Just very quickly, a technical question. Is it in regulation that there has to be facial recognition at the border, or could there be some other sort of proof of identity that could be provided in a digital way? I must declare an interest. I'm the chairman of the APPG on digital identity. We have been looking into some of these potentials of different technologies, and I just wondered if there were a statutory reason why that could...
I think that, as both my colleagues have said, the statutory requirement is for all of the data captured to be verified at the border. So even if it's captured in advance, it still has to be presented in a package to the border officer at the point of crossing.
It actually could be done by means of like a zero-knowledge proof of identity that was recognised in a transaction.
A lot of
blockchain at the border, which was
viably true. A lot of the work that we've been doing is looking into the possibilities of that happening. The current resistance is at this border point of control. Renaud, you may have additions.
If I may add to this, I think it's a really interesting point because the EU is right now starting drafting a legislation on what we call digital travel credential, which is in fact using e-identity for travel purposes. And we would hope that there would be at some point a convergence between this legislation and EES, making it possible for people's identity to be verified in advance, and so for people to come forward to the border, just show their face, and with a single recognition check, cross the border. But it's not yet possible, so we've been talking to the Commission, to DG Home about this for years, and we fear the legislative process will take a few more years. So but it's definitely the direction of travel, and we would encourage really the UK government to look into that direction. I should add to this that on the UK side of the border, we at Eurostar have been successfully trialling such a mobile application, in fact, a sort of a digital travel credential. It's today possible for some of our travelers at Eurostar to use a mobile application, scan their passport, scan their face. There is a reconciliation between the passport chip and the facial image, and the person comes to the border and can exit the UK with a single facial recognition check. So ideally, we would do this also with our Schengen partners, with EES, but today the regulation is such that it is not possible.
Now, for me, when John Keefe explained the ASS system at the start, it all made perfect sense to me, and why it works in places like Heathrow and not suitable for places like Eurotunnel. Just like, how many buses are going to be heading off to Heathrow to go on the same destination, but they're going to do it in the Eurotunnel, and that's the reason why it just doesn't seem to work. And it's there to enhance border security, and that just seemed to make perfect sense to me. Did it to you? And I found Sybil Cash's question of, is it a failure of this or is it that failure of that? And then he comes out with who's causing the logjam. For me, that would code for, can you give us a get out of jail free card because of the mess we've made since we went into that booth and put the cross in the wrong box? Sorry, Marcus, for stealing that, but it's a good line. And David Jones' question for me basically shows just how both, basically him and Bill Cash are just a right pair of cranks, especially when it came to their bureaucracy blaming for the Brexit they voted for. Yes, this is what you voted for, you both, of what you've campaigned for, what you fought for, and you're still not happy. Marcus Fish for me was just basically the cherry on top, with his facial recognition questions. I can imagine all three of these experts, who are witnesses, as you like to call them, they sat there metaphorically wanting to bash their heads against that table that's in front of them, because you're just thinking, we're explaining this to you, the reason why it's there, and you just don't seem to get it, or you don't want to. It's It's like that Empire 2.0, isn't it? You know, we're British, god damn you. And when I put in the title, don't want to control their border, what I was basically saying was, yeah, they want to control the border on our side, but you control your side of the border and there'll be hell to pay. And they just, whether they don't grasp the concept of there's two sides to a border, or they don't want to. Now, I thought these people were absolutely bonkers. But what do you guys think? Let me know down below. And if you've made it this far in this video, I know it's been long enough, give it a like. It all helps. And if you're new to this channel, and this is what I do, I cover stuff like this, like select committee meetings, to stuff with the House of Commons, give it a subscribe. Have a good weekend, and I shall bid you farewell, and take care, my friends, and see you Monday.